matter what country you're in or what language you speak, welcome around the world to the Hour of the Time. I'm your host, William Cooper. Tonight, folks, I come to you with a heavy heart. For another one, actually two of my predictions, one has come true, one is about to come true. The one that has come true involved the loss of life and the injury of over 500 people. And of course, I'm talking about the bombing of the World Trade Center in New York City. As far back as 1989 and ever since, I've been predicting major terrorist attacks upon the United States. The primary number one target, New York City. I've said it so many times, and so many people attending my lectures, listening to my broadcast, and who have read my book are familiar with it. I never enjoy being right when it involves the loss of life and human injury. Nevertheless, it is another chalk mark on the board, and I remain the most accurate predictor of future world events in the history of the world. The one that is about to come true and has not yet is the prediction that I made that the United States would send troops to Yugoslavia. And it appears that that is going to happen in the very near future. Anyway, we will see, won't we? As we move into the new world order, and all of these events are planned to take us directly into one world totalitarian socialist government. To all those people in the city of New York who lost relatives or who had friends or relatives that were injured, I offer you my deepest compassion, sympathy, and I wish that I could tell you that that was the end of it. But I can tell you that it is only the beginning. Unless people wake up, it will escalate, and there will be more. Well, let's continue where we left off. And this is about the society in the Middle East known as the Assassins. And we covered quite a bit of their history already. But this secret society, the most successful of secret societies, showed that its strength ultimately depended upon a powerful leader. Well, Kia Muhammad was no such leader. And little by little it became obvious that his own son, Hassan the Hated, was the stronger personality. Now remember, Kia Muhammad was the old man of the mountain, and the mountain lair was called the Eagle's Nest. Now Hassan, through some magnetic power, was able to capture the imagination of the assassins, soon having it believed that he himself was none other than the power of all powers, the hidden Imam, who had been mentioned by the first Grand Master, an incarnation of all greatness. So important was Hassan that he was the fountain of power, and others only held a very small measure of authority because he allowed them to have it, and for no other reason. This final absurdity was lapped up by members who had been conditioned to believe in things which were not, shall we say, exactly self-evident to the ordinary man. The doctrine of the all-powerful, invisible Imam was a part of Ishmaelism, and Hassan was ready, even during his early manhood, to assume the role. But since his father was able to assert himself by having some 250 of Hassan's followers murdered, he thought it wiser to hold his hand. In 1163, his chance came. Muhammad died, and Hassan II issued an order to all Ishmaelis to collect below the castle of Alamut. Never before had such an assembly of killers fanatics and dedicated perverters of the truth been seen. Hassan, probably in a state of megalomania, assured them that he had received a message from the Almighty, that is, from now, all the bonds of religion were loosed. Everyone might do as he liked. Later, in the modern age, we were to hear that again as, quote, the whole of the law shall be do as thou wilt, unquote. It was not necessary, he said, to keep up pretenses, and furthermore, he, Hassan, was none other than the hidden imam. His word was law, and he was a form of the divinity, not merely relaying instructions from above, but the divinity. Now there was one further obstacle, folks. According to Ismaili doctrine, the hidden imam was to be of the family of Hashim, the blood of Muhammad the prophet. Such descendants were known and revered, and it was common knowledge that Hassan, too, was not one of them. He overcame this difficulty by stating that he was not, in fact, the true son of Kia Muhammad the Persian, but an adopted child of the caliphal family of Egypt. This pretense was carried on for 4 years, during which the crazed Hassan showed that he was not as mad as he might have been by consolidating quite efficiently the power of the cult. Eventually, he was assassinated by his brother-in-law, Namwar the famous. Now the father-to-son succession seemed to be established. Muhammad II, son of Hassan II, began the cultivation of letters and sciences, which was to distinguish successive grandmasters of the order. It was a conceit of his in the time of the greatest flowering of Persian literature that he was supreme among poets and philosophers. He used his assassins also to drive this point well home. The Imam Razi, one of the greatest thinkers of the time, refused to acknowledge the assassins as the most advanced theologians, so Muhammad II sent an envoy to him promising either a swift death by dagger or a pension of several thousand gold pieces a year. Suddenly, oh yes, suddenly, the learned Imam's discourses seemed to lose their bite. One day soon afterwards, he was asked why he did not attack the assassins as of old. Because, said the old man with a nervous glance around the assembly where a murderer might lurk, their arguments are so sharp and pointed, and indeed they were. For 35 years, Muhammad II ruled the Ismailis with a rod of iron. The only law was that of obedience to the assassin will. The observances of ritual Islam were abolished. A new star had risen, remember that star? A power to stiffen resistance to crusader penetration. Saladin, who was to become an implacable foe of the assassins. The Syrian branch of the cult grew in power, while the activities of the Eastern assassins were carried out much more quietly, with missionaries being sent to India, Afghanistan, even the remote Pamir Mountains which straddle China and Russia, where even today adherents of the sect are to be found. Saladin had overcome the other Ismaili branch, the original home of assassin Egypt, and restored the true faith to the people of the Nile. He now had enough booty for 10 years' war against the Crusaders in Palestine and troops to spare. His first task was to unify the forces of Islam, and this he determined to do by force, if necessary. Sinan, ancient of the assassin cult in Syria, decided to oppose this terrible enemy of the Fatimites. 3 assassins fell upon Saladin and nearly killed him. This made the sect a priority target for the Saracen chief. The old man of the mountain, for his part, who was now Muhammad II, now unleashed a succession of fanatics in every kind of disguise upon Saladin. And by 1176, Saladin decided that an end must be put to the cult. He invaded their territory and started to lay it waste when the assassin chief offered him freedom of action to fight the Crusaders and no further attempt upon his life, if the cult were spared. Now, these terms were agreed to, and henceforth no assassin ever again attempted to molest Sultan Saladin. This period introduces Sinan as yet another strange and terrible assassin leader. For he had decided that he was the incarnation of all power and deity, and that he would live the part. Sinan was never seen to eat or drink, sleep, or even to spit. Now, can you imagine this? A living human being, never seen to eat or drink, sleep, or even to spit. Between sunrise and sunset, he stood on a pinnacle of rock, dressed in a hair shirt, and preached his own power and glory to delighted assassins. Have you ever worn a hair shirt? Have you ever stood on a pinnacle of rock between sunrise and sunset? I mean, every sunrise and sunset? And wearing a hair shirt every sunrise and sunset? Well, folks, this is historic fact. This is not something that someone made up. Thus, at one and the same time, there were two chiefs of the order, each busily telling his own followers that he and he alone was God. Hassan in Persia, Sinan in Syria, each commanded legions of devoted killers, all committed by oath to follow his path. When Muhammad II died, he was succeeded by his son Jalaluddin, who completely reversed the orders that the assassins were to have no outward religious observances. You see, he felt that he could do a great deal by adopting the cloak of orthodox piety, and sent ambassadors far and wide to announce his maintenance of the true faith. He went so far as to curse his predecessors publicly in order to convince the incredulous that such a people as the assassins could turn over a new leaf. As a result of what would today be called a long-term and comprehensive propaganda plan, he was acknowledged as a religious leader by half the orthodox monarchs of Islam, and the first assassin to be so styled, and came to be termed Prince Jalaluddin. Jalaluddin died in 1203, after 12 years of leadership of the cult, handing over to Aladdin, and you guys thought that was just a storybook tale, didn't you? Aladdin, a child of 9 years of age, weak, inefficient, stupid, Aladdin made little mark upon history, except in the classic tales of Arabia. The 1001 Arabian Nights. For Aladdin in the 1001 Arabian Nights is Aladdin, the leader of the assassins. It is said that his main activity was tending sheep, to which he was passionately attached, and he even had a small hut built in a sheepfold where he spent most of his time. Aladdin was extraordinarily cruel, in spite of the contact with the sheep, and continued to terrorize in time-honored fashion any person, great or small, who did not pay tribute or otherwise cooperate with the organization. And even today, those in power who are in contact with sheep most of the time ultimately turn out to be the same. And we all know who the sheeple are, don't we? The assassin's hands, ears, and eyes were everywhere. Once fully initiated, a man might be sent to a place 1,000 miles away to take up residence and live, waiting for the moment when orders came to him from Alamut to fulfill his fatal destiny, and all the while in between furnishing intelligence to the central headquarters of the assassins. A story is told of the court of the Shah of Khwarizm. Thus, quote, the Ismaili ambassador spent some time with Vizier one day after a splendid banquet. When the wine, which they had been drinking in violation of the law, had mounted into their heads, the ambassador told the Vizier by way of confidence that there were several Ismailis among the pages, grooms, guards, and other persons who were immediately about the Sultan. The Vizier, dismayed and at the same time curious to know who these dangerous attendants were, besought the ambassador to point them out to him, giving him his napkin as a pledge that nothing evil should happen to them. Instantly, at a sign from the envoy, 5 of the persons who were attendants in the chamber stepped forth, avowing themselves to be concealed assassins. On such a day, and at such an hour, said one of them, an Indian, to the vizier, I might have slain thee without being seen or punished, and if I did not do so, it was only because I had no orders from my superiors. Unquote. The vizier, of course, begged for his life, but word got to the Sultan, who ordered the assassins to be apprehended and burned alive, and the 5 chamberlains were cast on the flaming pyre, where they died exulting at being found worthy to suffer in the service of the great sheik of the mountain. So powerful was their devotion to the cult. The assassins had the last laugh, for an order arrived immediately afterwards from Alamut that the Shah must pay 10,000 pieces of gold as compensation for each man killed, which he did, or be killed himself. Another subsidiary activity which the assassins delighted in was the holding captive of Alamut of useful, rare, and distinguished personages who could be of value to them in educational, military, or other spheres, and one was a physician, another a famous astronomer, a third the greatest painter in Persia, who worked to the order of the chief alone. The end of a chapter was near. For the Mongol hordes under Halaku, lieutenant of Chinggis, were steadily destroying all the civilization of Islam which lay in their inexorable path westwards. Rukniddin, son of Aladdin, succeeded him and tried at first to turn the Mongol tide. After a series of encounters, pitched battles, intrigues, and counter-intrigues, Rukniddin was taken. He played for time as long as he could, but he was eventually murdered in his own turn by the victorious Mongol chief's men. Assassin power in Persia was broken, and what remained of the members were ordered, none knows by whom, to conceal their faith and await a signal that the cult was in full operation again. Alamut was silenced, and the Syrian headquarters alone remained. And if it had not been for the refusal of the Christian kings in Europe to send ambassadors to make a treaty for a new crusade with the Mongol horde, then all of Islam would have been decimated. But it was not. For the Christian kings, even though they would have liked to regain their foothold in the Middle East, had problems of their own and ignored the Mongol emissaries. It was a long time until the Mamluk Sultan of Egypt was able to overcome the Mongol thrust. In 1260, however, he carried the banners of Islam victoriously against them and restored the fortress of Alamut and other properties to the assassins, who were strongly surviving underground. They soon found that they had exchanged one master for another, for the Egyptians were now employing them for their own purposes and required them to undergo a new initiation, that of the ancient Egyptian mysteries of Babylon. Ibn Battuta, the great traveler of the 14th century, found them well entrenched in their former strong places, being used as the, quote, arrows of the Sultan of Egypt, with which he reaches his enemies, unquote. The supposed suppression of the creed which followed the Mongol destruction did not, in fact, take place. Copying each other, historians have asserted that Assassinism died 600 years ago. Nothing could be further from the truth. Now and again, however, fresh facts of their continued existence still come to light. In the 18th century, an Englishman, the British consul at Aleppo in Syria, was at pains to make this better known. He said, quote, "Some authors assert that these people were entirely extirpated in the 13th century by the Tartars, but I, who have lived so long in this infernal place, will venture to affirm that some of their spawn still exists in the mountains that surround us, for nothing is so cruel, barbarous, and execrable that is not acted and even gloried in by these cursed assassins," unquote. The assassins were widely dispersed throughout Asia. The rise of the thugs, the secret society of assassination of India, followed the Mongol invasion of Persia. Indeed, at least one of the thug recognition signals, Ali Bahai Salam, indicates salutations to Ali. the descendant of the prophet most greatly revered by the assassins. Ishmaelis, not all of them recognizing the one chief, reside in places as far apart as Malaya, East Africa, and Ceylon. They would not necessarily feel that they are assassins in the same sense as the extremists who followed the old sheiks of the mountains, but at least some of them revere the descendants of the lords of Alamut to the extent of deification. The modern phase of Ishmaelism dates from 1810, when the French consul at Aleppo found that the assassins in Persia recognized as their divinely inspired chief a reputed descendant of the fourth Grand Master of Alamut, who then lived at Kek, a small village between Isfahan and Tehran. This Shah, Khalilullah, quote, was revered almost like a god and credited with the power of working miracles. The followers of Khalilullah would, when he pared his nails, fight for the clippings. The water in which he washed became holy water. The sect next appeared to the public gaze through an odd happening. In 1866, a law case was decided in Bombay. There is in that city a large community of commercial men known as Kohas. A Persian, the record tells us, Aga Khan Mehalati, a native of Mehalat, a place situate near Kek, had sent an agent to Bombay to claim from the Khojas the annual tribute due from them to him, and amounting to about 10,000 English pounds. The claim was resisted, and the British court was appealed to by Aga Khan. Sir Joseph Arnold investigated his claim. The Aga proved his pedigree, showing that he had descended in a direct line from the fourth Grand Master of Alamut, and Sir Joseph declared it proved. And it was further demonstrated by the trial that the Kohas were members of the ancient sect of the Assassins, to which sect they had been converted 400 years before by an Ishmaelite missionary who composed a work which has remained the sacred book of the Kohas. In the first Afghan war, the then Aga Khan contributed a force of light cavalry to the British forces. For this he was awarded a pension. Hitti, in his History of the Arabs, notes, page 448 in 1951 edition, that the assassin sect known as Kohas and Malwas gave over a tenth of their revenues to the Aga Khan, who spends most of his time as a sportsman between Paris and London. The influence of the new form of organization and training, as well as initiatory techniques of the assassins upon later societies, has been remarked by a number of students, and I have found in my research that it's absolutely true. That the Crusaders knew a good deal about the Ishmaelis is shown from the detailed descriptions of them which survive. Esh Amir Ali, an Orientalist of considerable repute, goes further in his assessment. Quote, "From the Ishmaelis, the Crusaders borrowed the conception which led to the formation of all the secret societies, religious and secular, of Europe. The institutions of Templars and Hospitallers, the Society of Jesus, founded by Ignatius Loyola, composed by a body of men whose devotion to their cause can hardly be surpassed in our time. The ferocious Dominicans, the milder Franciscans, may all be traced either to Cairo or to Alamut. The Knights Templar, especially, with their system of Grand Masters, Grand Priors, and religious devotees, and their degrees of initiation, bear the strongest analogy to the Eastern Ishmaelis." We've got to take a break, folks. I'll be right back right after this short pause. In the year 1110, a mysterious order called the Priory de Sion appeared upon the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. This mysterious secret order, the Priory de Sion, was eventually to crown the first king, the first Christian king of Jerusalem. When they appeared on the Temple Mount in 1110, they recruited 9 knights to scour the Temple Mount, the passages and caverns and tunnels beneath, for the ancient remains of the relics of the religion. Later, in A.D. 1118, 9 knights, supposedly concerned for the welfare of pilgrims to the Holy Land, bound themselves together in the creation of a knightly order. This order, again, existing of 9 knights, just like the original 9 knights, were commissioned by the Priory de Sion. In under 200 years, folks, this organization had become one of the most powerful single entities, if not the greatest power ever to exist in Europe. They were the first international bankers, the first that ever existed in the world. A few years later, it was utterly destroyed. They say, however, as you're going to find out, they were not destroyed at all, but merely driven underground. The zeal of religion, the conditioning which made men support a dedicated cause with all of their might, was likewise the instrument of their destruction. Nothing less than religious fervor could have smashed the order, as nothing less could have created it. And folks, you're going to find it difficult to believe, but the rise of this order and the destruction, at least publicly, of this order has such a great bearing on events today that you could say that everything that has happened since has been brought about by this one series of acts. Were the Knights Templar devil worshippers? Secret Saracens indulging in obscene orgies? Did they adore a head, spit on the cross, use the words Yallah, which means literally in Arabic, O Allah, in their rituals? Did they learn their ways from the terrible sect of the Assassins? Well, yes, folks, they did. And they are the link, at least in that day, would have been considered the modern link between the ancient mystery religion of Babylon and Europe. For the religion had come to Europe long, long before the Templars ever emerged and made their appearance in the ancient worship of the sun by the Druids and the Celts and the tribes, the Germanic tribes, who had made their way thousands of years ago from the Middle East up through Asia, across Russia, and into Europe. They brought Mystery Babylon with them and practiced it as what we know now today as the pagan religion. And Stonehenge is actually an ancient Babylonian temple of the sun. And you will find how all this connects later. But the origin of this was lost, and the ability to control large numbers of people by the use of the hidden knowledge of the ages was lost. It wasn't until the Knights Templar bought and brought the mystery religion of Babylon to Europe that the ancient worship of the sun again took hold amongst the Christian countries in the guise of Christianity, which was itself, at that time, I'm not talking about the teachings of Christ, now I'm talking about the perversion of the teachings of Christ, the melding of the teachings of Christ with the ancient worship of the sun, the mystery religion of Babylon, which became the Catholic Church, was indeed another branch of the ancient mystery religion of Babylon. Now, some of you out there may be confused on all of this. If you've been listening from the beginning of this series, then you're right on target. You're not confused. You know exactly what I'm talking about. If you've picked up this series somewhere in the middle, then you need to call Stan and order the studio quality tapes. They're in stereo. They're on TDK tapes. They are first quality tapes and crystal clear. You need to order this series from the first tape, the very first. And that was broadcast on February the 12th, I believe, a Friday. But anyway, Stan will know. Give him a call at 602-567-6109. That's 602-567-6109. Or write to Stan and ask him for an information packet at P.O. Box 889, Camp Verde, Arizona, 86322. That's P.O. Box 889, Camp Verde, Arizona, 86322. Now, folks, the original objective of the Order of the Temple, the Knights Templar, which immediately became the subject of applause throughout Christendom, was to combine the two functions of monk and knight, to live chastely and fight the Saracens with the sword and spirit. The sweet Mother of God, at least outwardly they say, was chosen as their patroness, and they bound themselves to live in accordance with the rules of St. Augustine, electing as their first leader Hugh de Payens. Now King Baldwin II granted them a part of his palace to live in and gave them a grant towards their upkeep. Now the part of the palace that they lived in was actually an ancient mosque, which was built upon the actual location of the old Temple of Solomon on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. The Knights Templar vowed to consecrate their swords, arms, strength, and lives to the defense of the mysteries of the Christian faith, to pay complete and utter obedience to the orders of the Grand Master, to fight whenever commanded, regardless of perils, for the faith of Christ as they understood it. Among the vows taken were those which forbade their yielding even a foot of land to the enemy, whoever the enemy was, and not to retreat, even if attacked, in the proportion of 3 to 1. They chose the name Militia Templi, Soldiers of the Temple, after the temple supposedly built by Solomon in Jerusalem, near which they had been assigned quarters by the king, but in reality had nothing to do with the Temple of Solomon. Some say that the Templars derived their idea of their order from that of the Hospitallers, who looked after Catholic pilgrims to Palestine, for there was little hospitality to be had from the native Orthodox Christians of those parts. Others hold that there was an even older order from which they received their inspiration. No reliable evidence on this point is, however, available according to the, quote, establishment, unquote, historians, although for those who really research the true history of the secret orders, and specifically the Knights Templars, there's a direct connection to the assassins and the Roshaniya. Although the Templars were so poor that 2 men had to share a horse, they say, but that is not true at all, and their seal commemorated this decades after they became one of the richest communities of their time, they soon attracted favorable notice and support. Now, the 2 knights riding the horse was a symbol of sacrifice. It denoted their vows of poverty. In truth, each knight not only had a horse, but he had what they called a yeoman. He had a spare horse. He had a pack horse, and he had several horses in reserve, and a whole train of servants. But the Knights Templar were the first true, as we know it, in modern times. In modern times, there were others before, but they're the first true in modern times. By modern, I say, from the time that Europe escaped from the old tribal paganism. In other words, in the year 1110, I consider that the beginning of the modern age, although historians may disagree with me. It's the beginning of everything that's ever happened since, and everything that's happening today can be traced right to the door of the Knights Templar. And that's why I say that. They were the first modern order to practice what we now know as true communism. They were the ones who brought international socialism into Europe, which has always been the tenet and the creed of the mystery religion of Babylon. Only 1 year after their establishment, Fulk, Count of Anjou, who had come to Jerusalem on a pilgrimage, joined as a married member and gave them an annual grant of 30 pounds of silver. This example was soon followed by other devout Western princes. For the first 9 years of their existence, the knights continued to live a life of chastity and poverty in accordance with their vows. They adopted a striped white and black banner called the Busant, after their original piebald horse, and this word also became their battle cry. Special raiment they had none, and they wore whatever clothes were given to them by the pious, but little by little, as one writer puts it, they were to become haughty and insolent. And the black and white banner, the translation of the meaning of which was for the, again, exoteric. For the real meaning of the black and white banner was the meaning of the androgynous God, the positive, the negative, the black and the white, the yin and the yang. The male and the female combined into one, and that was the real meaning of the black and white banner. And it's carried forth today on the floor of many of the temples of Freemasonry, where the black and white checkered pattern exists, and in one famous cathedral in Europe, built by the Knights Templar. They disguised their esoteric religion in an exoteric manner that would be accepted by Christianity. Baldwin of Jerusalem, who had been a prisoner in the hands of the Saracens and knew of their disunity, realized at about this time that Islam must eventually unite against the Christian invasion, and he decided that the Templars would prove ideal allies in the battles which were to come. In 1127, therefore, he sent 2 Templars with his strong recommendation to the Pope, applying for official recognition of the order by the Holy See. And this is the first time that the Templars even were considered to be close to the center of religion, the Christian religion in that day, the Catholic Church, the Pope. For they were not commissioned as a Christian order. They were not commissioned by the Pope or by the Church. And this is a big myth that the Knights Templar started out to protect the Church and protect the pilgrims on their way to Jerusalem. They were established first, primarily and foremost, as a branch of the ancient order of the religion of Mystery Babylon. And it's indicative of the strategies that they've used since to endear themselves to whatever the established power or the beliefs of the majority of the people might be. When they went to see the Pope, they had an introduction to Saint Bernard himself, the abbot of Clairvaux, who was known to be an admirer of theirs and who was a nephew of one of their envoys. Then the Grand Master himself arrived in Europe and received the eulogistic opinion of the abbot. Quote, "They go not headlong into battle, but with care and foresight, peacefully, as true children of Israel. But as soon as the fight is begun, they rush without delay upon the foe and know no fear. One is often put to flight 1,000 to 10,000, gentler than lambs and grimmer than lions. Theirs is the mildness of monks and the valor of the knight." Unquote. Now, folks, this was a strong recommendation, and this testimonial was a part of the campaign to help the Templars in their efforts at recognition by the Pope. All of you who have thought that they began as a religious order in the first place are so way off base that it's pathetic. And neither were the Jesuits a religious order in the first place, but we'll get that together in another broadcast. But on the 31st of January in the year 1128, the Master appeared before the Council of Troyes. Now, this formidable body consisted of the archbishops of Reims and Sens, 10 bishops, and a number of abbots, including Saint Bernard himself, presided over by the Cardinal of Albano, the papal legate. They were approved, and Pope Honorius chose for them a white mantle, completely plain. The red cross was added by order of Pope Eugenius III in 1146. And see, you thought the Templars thought of this. Nope, not at all. This was mandated by 2 popes. First, a white mantle, completely plain, and then later the Red Cross was added by order of Pope Eugenius III in 1146. Hugh de Payens now took his delegation through France and England and collected a number of recruits. Gifts and grants were showered upon the order. Lands, rents, and arms were forthcoming from all quarters. Richard I of England was enthusiastic about them. By 1133, King Alfonso of Aragon and Navarre, who had fought the Spanish Moors in 29 battles, had willed his country to them. Although when the Moors finally laid him low, his nobles prevented the Templars from claiming their rights. Nevertheless, this was a great honor. In fact, to my knowledge and to our research into history, it had never before been done. In 1129, the master, accompanied by 300 knights recruited from the noblest houses of Europe, led a huge train of pilgrims to the Holy Land. It was at this time that the Templars formed part of the Christian contingent, which, allied with the assassins, tried to take Damascus. And it wasn't the first time nor the last that the Christian Knights Templar, or supposedly Christian Knights Templar, they really weren't Christian at all, were allied with the assassins. Were they, as the Orientalist von Hammer alleges, connected in some secret way with the assassins? Yes, our research shows that it is a historical fact. And it is also an historical fact that the assassins were prepared to adopt Christianity if they could gain greater power thereby. Christianity, that is, on the surface, just as the Knights Templar had done. Hammer points to the similarity of the two organizations. The followers of Hassan ibn Sabah were in contact with the Templars and had a similar method of organization. They were in existence before the Templars were formed. The Ishmaelites, the Ishmaelians, or assassins, was the original. And folks, the Order of the Templars was the copy. The balance of Western opinion is against this contention, more particularly because one feels from wide reading of historians great sympathy is felt for the cruelly treated and arbitrarily disposed Templars. Thus, Kitely, who made a close study of the order, attacks those who would claim that the Templars were an assassin branch, but when you do research into the associations and memberships of Kitely, you'll find that Kitely was himself a Knight Templar. And he said, quote, "When nearly 30 years after their institution, the Pope gave them permission to wear a cross on their mantle, like the rival Hospitaller order, no color could present itself so well suited to those who daily and hourly exposed themselves to martyrdom as that of blood, in which there was so much of what was symbolical. With respect to internal organization at will, we apprehend, be always found that this is for the most part of the growth of time and the product of circumstances, and is always nearly the same where these last are similar," unquote. And you find this kind of rhetoric and semantics all through the writings of those who wish to cover the true origin and the true meaning of Mystery Babylon. The famous question of the 3,000 gold pieces paid by the Syrian branch of the assassins to the Templars is another matter, which has, of course, never been settled. One opinion holds that this money was given as a tribute to the Christians, the other that it was a secret allowance from the larger to the smaller organization, which it really was, as the assassins wished to expand their control. And remember, their original goal was to take over the entire world by the systematic infiltration and control of each individual country. Those who think that the assassins were just fanatical Muslims and therefore would not form any alliance with those who to them were infidels should be reminded that to the followers of the old man of the mountain, only he was right, and the Saracens who were fighting the holy war for Allah against the Crusaders were as bad as anyone else who did not accept the assassin doctrine. And it is true today. Quote, "If you are not one of us, you are nothing," unquote. Quote, the ends justify the means, unquote. Quote, the strength of our order exists in the fact that we manifest ourselves under many different names and many different occupations, and sometimes even seem to oppose ourselves, but at the highest level we are of one mind, unquote. And I could go on and on and on, and you all know that I can go on and on and on, for I've studied this for so many years that I eat, drink, and sleep it. Oh, yes. Well, eventually grave charges against the Templars during the Crusades included the allegation that they were fighting for themselves alone. And more than one historical incident bears this out. The Christians had besieged the town of Ascalon in 1153 and were engaged upon burning down the walls with large piles of inflammable materials. Part of the wall fell after a whole night of this burning. The Christian army was about to enter when the master of the temple, Bernard de Tremeliae, claimed the right to take the town himself. This was because the first contingent into a conquered town had the whole spoils. As it happened, the garrison rallied and killed the Templars, closing the breach. There seemed good grounds for believing that the power which they had gained caused the Templars to devote their efforts as much as their own order's welfare as to the cause of the cross, in spite of their tremendous sacrifices for that cause. Having no loyalty to any territorial chief, they obeyed their master alone, and hence no softening political pressure could be put upon them. Well, this might well have led to an idea that they were an invisible superstate, and that is exactly the fact. But this does show some similarity with the invisible empire of the assassins. If none can deny their bravery, their high-handedness and exclusivity in less than 150 years after their founding gave them the reputation of considering themselves almost a law unto themselves. And now, dear listeners, we get into the meat. The direct connection between the historical events and the events that are happening today. Don't miss even one episode of this series. Good night. I'm William Cooper, and you're listening to the Hour of the Time. Well, folks, we've been getting calls from all over the nation, and even in some foreign countries, they have been worried. They've called Stan. His phone has been ringing off the hook. It seems some rather spurious and ambitious individuals have been spreading the rumor by word of mouth, by the written word, and even on talk radio all across this country that I'm dead. Well, folks, here's my answer to that. To all of my regular listeners and all the ships at sea around the world, it's me, William Cooper, speaking to you from the dead, where I have indeed seen the light, and I turned it off. One of the most disgraceful acts which stain the annals of the Templars, says even one of their ardent admirers, occurred in the year 1155, when Bertrand de Blancfort, whom William of Tyre calls a, quote, pious and God-fearing man, unquote, was master of the order. In a contest for the supreme power in Egypt, which the viziers bearing the proud title of Sultan exercised under the phantom caliphs, Sultan Abbas, who had put to death the caliph, his master, found himself obliged to fly from before the vengeance of the incensed people. With his harem, and his own and a great part of the royal treasures, he took his way through the desert. Well, a body of Christians, chiefly Templars, lay in wait for the fugitives near Ascalon. The resistance offered by the Moslems was slight and very ineffectual. Abbas himself was either slain or he fled, and his son, Nisardin, professed his desire to become a Christian. The far larger part of the booty, of course, fell to the Templars, but this did not satisfy their avarice. They sold Nasiruddin to his father's enemies for 60,000 pieces of gold. Now, if you think that's a lot of money in this day and age, it was a veritable king's ransom in that. And they stood by to see him bound hand and foot and placed in a sort of cage or iron latticed sedan on a camel to be conducted to Egypt, where a death by protracted torture awaited him. It was not the Templars alone, folks, who were guilty of arrogance and worse. The Hospitallers had deteriorated from their first fine beginnings, and the annals of both orders are not innocent of unpleasantness, though they are indeed well filled with tales of glory. The Hospitallers, for instance, refused to pay tithes to the Patriarch of Jerusalem, even going so far as to erect immense buildings in front of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre as a practical demonstration of their own importance. And when the Patriarch entered his church, they rang their bells so loudly that he could not make himself heard. There is an occasion recorded when, quote, the congregation was assembled in church, the Hospitallers rushed into it in arms and shot arrows among them as if they were robbers or infidels. These arrows were collected and hung up on Mount Calvary, where Christ had been crucified, to the scandal of these recreant knights. On applying to Pope Adrian IV for redress, the Syrian clergy found him and his cardinals so prepossessed in favor of his enemies, bribed by them in fact, as was said, that they had no chance of relief, unquote. This, then, folks, was the background of the rise of the Templars and the flavor of their environment. Now, if one adds to these elements the fact that various very heterodox sects, Gnostic, Manichae, and the rest, still lurked in the Holy Land, together with a great deal of magic and superstition of every kind, then there is a possibility, to say the least, that the Templars were infected by it. The facts indeed show that they were not only infected, but taken by it, and were initiated into not only the branch known as the Assassins, but veritably arose from the secret sects in Syria. The contention which has been made that such heresies and archaic religions and practices did not survive until the Templar period is demonstrably false, although much play has been made of it by those who would defend the order. For do such sects not endure there until this very day? Well, this is not to say that the Templars were guilty of the practices which formed the substance of the confessions later to be wrung from them by barbaric torture, which we will examine in due course. But a secret tradition and magical rites may well have played a part in their hidden lore and practices. It should also be remembered, folks, that towards the end there were Templars who were of actual Palestinian birth, who would have every opportunity of absorbing the unorthodox beliefs of the many schools of a magical religious nature which existed in the area. The Grand Master Philippe of Nablus, in 1167, for instance, was a Syrian, and many crusaders were Levantine lords, whatever their original blood, speaking Arabic with perfection. It was in 1162 that the Magna Carta of the order was obtained by the Templars. The bull Omne Datum Optimum, often described as the keystone of their power. And through this instrument they were able to consolidate their authority and preserve their secrets against intrusion. They were to find, too, that it did much to excite the envy of their opponents. Pope Adrian IV had died. The two rival popes were elected, Alexander III by the Sicilian group and Victor III by the imperial party. At first the Templars acknowledged Victor, but in 1161 they switched their allegiance to Alexander. There was probably some sort of secret arrangement behind this, for by January 7th of the following year the famous bull was issued. By the terms of this document, the Templars were released from all spiritual ties except to the Holy See itself. They were permitted to have special burial grounds in their own houses, They could have chaplains of their own. They had no tithes to pay, which in that day and age was miraculous, and were allowed to receive tithes, which was absolutely incredible. Nobody who had once entered the order could leave it, except to join one with a stricter discipline. The stage, dear listeners, was set for clerical hatred of the Templars and Hospitallers, who had similar privileges, and in fact were one and the same, and still are today, although the advantages to the Pope from the combined support of these two orders could hardly be overestimated. In 1184, an incident occurred which inspired a great deal of distrust of the order, although the rarity of its occurrence should have underlined the fact that it was nothing of much consequence. You see, the English knight Robert of St. Albans left the Templars, became a Moslem, and led an army for Saladin against Jerusalem, then in the hands of the Franks. The charge against the Templars that they were secret Mussulmans or allies of the Saracens does not seem borne out by the fact that Saladin accused them of treacherous truce breaking and other crimes, and unlike his usual chivalrous self, took a solemn oath that he would execute such Templar captives as he could obtain as, quote, beyond the limits of Islam and infidelity alike, unquote. Nor did they make any attempts to invoke any religious bond with Saladin when they were captured, as we know from the Arabic life of Saladin, written contemporaneously by his secretary, Qadi Yusuf. Strong evidence of this is given in the events which followed the terrible Battle of Hattin. 2 years before, Saladin had made a pact with the assassins that they would give him a free hand to continue his holy war against the Franks, which we discussed on an earlier program. On July the 1st, 1187, he captured Tiberias. He attacked nearby Hattin at dawn on Friday, July the 3rd. 30,000 Christians were captured, including the king of Jerusalem. No Templar, not one, is mentioned in the detailed Arab account as asking for mercy on religious or any other grounds, although all knew that Saladin had issued a war cry, quote, "Come to death, Templars," unquote. The Grand Master, Gerard of Rydfort, and several other knights were among those taken. Saladin offered them their lives if they would see the light of the true faith. Well, according to history, none accepted, and all these knights were beheaded except, admittedly, the Templar Grand Master. Could it be that he did accept the true faith, or the light of the true faith, as Saladin had put it? A non-Templar, Reginald of Chatillon, tried to invoke the sacred code of Arab hospitality, and other crusaders claimed that they were Muslims and were spared. None of them were Templars or Hospitallers. Reginald and the Templars collectively were sentenced to death for breaking the truth and the war crime of killing unarmed pilgrims to Mecca. Arab accounts include only a few references which could be construed as indicating any collusion with the Christian army. One says that on the Friday at midday, and the battle lasted for 2 days, Sultan Saladin issued the attack cry to be passed along the Saracen host, quote, "On for Islam," unquote, at which the striped banner of the Templars was raised. And the Emir Lion of the Faith said, "Are those Sultan Saladin Yusuf's allies of whom I have heard from the reconnaissance men?" Well, this cannot be regarded as anything at all conclusive. The only other reference is to a body of Templars who went over to the Saracen side and whose supposed descendants survive to this day as the Salabiya, which means Crusader, tribe in North Arabia. This engagement, folks, spelt the end of real Western power in Palestine for over 700 years, although it did stimulate the unsuccessful Third Crusade. Although the Templars and some other Crusaders were still in the Holy Land, they had lost almost all of their possessions there. But in the West lay the real seat of their power. At this time, their European possessions numbered over 7,000 estates and foundations. Although principally concentrated in France and England, they had extensive properties in Portugal, Castile, Leon, Scotland, and Ireland, Germany, Italy, and Sicily. When Jerusalem was lost, their headquarters were transferred to Paris. This building, like all their branch churches, was known as the Temple. It was here that the French king Philip the Fair took refuge in 1306 to escape a civil commotion. It is said that this visit gave him his first insight into the real wealth of the order. Now remember, the wealth was not for the members, for they practiced the first true socialism, international socialism, or communism. The fabulous treasures which his host showed him, giving the bankrupt monarch the idea to plunder the knights on the pretext that they were dominated by heresies. Philippe the Fair was not entirely without some grounds for attacking the Templars. For in 1208 we find Pope Innocent III, a great friend of the order, censuring them publicly for, quote, causing their churches to be thrown open for Mass to be said every day with loud ringing of bells, bearing the cross of Christ on their breast, but not caring to follow his doctrines, which forbid giving offense to the little ones who believe in him. Following the doctrines of demons, they affixed their cross of the order upon the breast of every kind of scoundrel, asserting that whoever, by paying 2 or 3 pence a year, became one of their fraternity, could not, even if interdicted, be deprived of Christian burial. And thus they themselves, being captive to the devil, ceased not to make captive the souls of the faithful, seeking to make alive those whom they knew to be dead. Unquote. The first sign of an attempt to bring some sort of physical restraint upon the Templars came from Henry III of England. For in 1252 he hinted that he might try to seize some of the property of the order. Quote, you prelates and religious, he said, especially you Templars and Hospitallers, have so many liberties and charters that your enormous possessions make you rave with pride and haughtiness. What was imprudently given must therefore be prudently revoked, and what was inconsiderately bestowed must be considerately recalled. Unquote. Those were the words of the king. The master of the Templars immediately replied, quote, what sayest thou, O king? Far be it that thy mouth should utter so disagreeable and silly a word. So long as thou dost exercise justice, thou wilt reign. But if thou infringe it, thou wilt cease to be king. Unquote. Now remember that the Knights Templar at that time were the very first international bankers. They were the wealthiest order, wealthiest group then known in the world, even surpassing the kings of the different countries that existed. And even though the Hospitallers were created before the Knights Templar, eventually the two became the same order, though to the public and to the rulers of Europe, they were different orders with different names. The haughty Templars of the 14th century owned land and revenues, gained steadily in honor and importance. They might have had thrones had they wanted them, for such was their power towards the end that, banded together, as one historian points out, they could have overcome more than one of the smaller countries of Europe. Perhaps, though, they aimed even higher than that. If their eventual aim was world hegemony, they could not have organized themselves better or planned their aristocratic hierarchy more thoroughly. And you will see that that's been carried over even unto the modern day. The pride, arrogance, and complete confidence and self-sufficiency of the order is something which shows through even the least inspired pages of the chroniclers. Their power was legendary. Everywhere they had churches, chapels, tithes, farms, villages, mills, rights of pasturage, of fishing, of venery, of wood. They had also in many places the right of holding annual fairs, which were managed, and the tolls received by some of the brethren of the nearest houses or by their donates or servants. The number of their preceptories is, by the most moderate computation, rated at 9,000. The annual income of the order, put at about 6 millions pounds sterling, an unbelievable, unimaginable sum for those times. Masters of such a revenue descended from the noblest houses in Christendom. uniting in their purses the most esteemed secular and religious characters, regarded as the chosen champions of Christ and the flower of Christian knights, it was not possible for the Templars in such lax times as the 12th and 13th centuries to escape falling into the vices of extravagant luxury and overweening pride. The order, folks, when fully developed, was composed of several classes. Chiefly knights, chaplains and serving brothers. Affiliated were those who were attached to the order and worked for it and received its protection without taking its vows, and this affiliation was said to be derived from the Arab clientship association, analogous to blood brotherhood and tribal associations. A candidate for knighthood should prove that he was of a knightly family and entitled to the distinction. His father must have been a knight, or eligible to become one. He had to prove beyond any doubt that he was born in wedlock. The reason for this last requirement was said to be not only religious. There was the possibility that a political head, such as a king or prince, might influence the order by managing to have one of his bastard sons enter it, later perhaps to rise to high rank therein, and finally attaching it to the service of his dominion. The candidate for initiation had to be unmarried and free from all obligations. He should have made no vow nor entered any other order. And he was not to be in debt. Eventually, the competition for admission was so great from eligible people that a very high fee was exacted from those who were to be monk warriors of the temple. All candidates were to be knighted before entry into the order. But the period of probation which was originally demanded was before very long entirely abolished. No young man could be admitted until he was 21 years of age, because he was to be a soldier as well as a monk, and this was the minimum age at which he could bear arms. When a new knight was admitted to the order, the ceremony was held in secret. This fact and persistent rumors caused the belief that certain ceremonies and tenets were put into practice which deviated more than a little from the rituals of the church. The ceremony was held in one of the order's chapels in the presence of the assembled chapter alone. The master or the prior, who took his place in chapels other than those at which he was present, opened the proceedings. Quote, "Beloved brethren, you see that the majority are agreed to receive this man as a brother. If there be any among you who knows anything of him on account of which he cannot lawfully become a brother, let him say it. For it is better that this should be signified beforehand than after he is brought before us." Unquote. And if no objection was lodged, the aspirant was sent to a small room with 2 or 3 experienced knights to coach him in what he had to know. Quote, "Brother, are you desirous of being associated with the order?" Unquote. If he agreed, they would dwell upon the trials and rigors of being a Templar. They would prepare him for initiation. He had to reply that for the sake of God he was willing to undergo anything and remain in the order for life. They asked him if he had a wife or was betrothed, and he made vows to any other order. Did he owe money more than he could pay? Was he of sound mind and body? Was he the servant of any person? Well, after satisfactory answers, the result was passed to the master. The assembled company was then asked again if they knew anything that might disqualify him, and if none objected, they were asked, "Are you willing that he should be brought in God's name?" The knights answered, quote, "Let him be brought in God's name." Unquote. He was now again asked by his sponsors if he still desired to enter the order. Receiving an affirmative reply, they led him to the chapter, where he folded his hands and flung himself upon his knees. Quote, "Sir, I am come before God and before you for the sake of God and our dear Lady to admit me into your society and the good deeds of the order as one who will be all his life long the servant and slave of the order." Unquote. "Beloved brother," answered the receptor, "you are desirous of a great matter, for you see nothing but the outward shell of our order." Now let me repeat that again in case you weren't listening, folks. "Beloved brother," answered the receptor, "you are desirous of a great matter, for you see nothing but the outward shell of our order. It is only the outward shell, when you see that we have fine horses and rich comparisons, that we eat and drink well and are splendidly clothed. From this you conclude that you will be well off with us, but you know not the rigorous maxims which are in our interior. For it is a hard matter for you, who are your own master, to become the servant of another. You will hardly be able to perform in future what you wish yourself. For when you may wish to be on this side of the sea, you will be sent to the other side. When you will wish to be in Acre, you will be sent to the district of Antioch, to Tripolis, or to Armenia, or you will be sent to Apulia, to Sicily, or to Lombardy, or to Burgundy, France, England, or any other country where we have houses and possessions, where we wish you to do our will. Further, he says, when you will wish to sleep, you will be ordered to watch. When you will wish to watch, then you will be ordered to go to bed. When you will wish to eat, then you will be ordered to do something else. And as both we and you might suffer great inconvenience from what you have mayhap concealed from us, look here on the holy evangelists and the word of God, and answer the truth to the questions which we shall put to you. For if you lie, you will be perjured and may be expelled the order from which God keep you. Unquote. Now all the former questions were asked on Holy Writ. If the answers proved acceptable, the receptor continued. Quote, Beloved brother, take good care that you have spoken the truth to us, for should you have spoken false on any one point, you might be put out of the order from which God keep you. Now, beloved brother, attend strictly to what we shall say unto you. Do you promise to God and to our dear Lady Mary to be all your life long obedient to the master of the temple and to the prior who shall be set over you? Unquote. And the initiate answers with, Yea, sir, with the help of God. Again he is asked, Do you promise to God and to our dear Lady Mary to live chaste of your body all your life long? And he answers, Yea, sir, with the help of God. And he's again asked, Do you promise to God and to our dear Lady Mary to observe all your life long the laudable manners and customs of our order, both those which are already in use and those which the master and knights may add? And he answers, Yea, sir, with the help of God. And then he's asked, Do you promise to God and to our dear Lady Mary that you will, with the strength and powers which God has bestowed on you, help as long as you live to conquer the holy land of Jerusalem, and that you will with all your strength aid to keep and guard that which the Christians possess? And he answers, Yea, sir, with the help of God. And he's asked, Do you promise to God and to our dear Lady Mary never to hold this or leave this order for stronger or weaker, for better or worse, than with the permission of the master or the chapter which has the authority? And he answers, Yea, sir, with the help of God. And then he's asked, Do you finally promise to God and to our dear Lady Mary never to be present when a Christian is unjustly and unlawfully despoiled of his heritage, and that you will never by counsel or by act take part therein? And he answers, Yea, sir, with the help of God. And then, in the name then of God and our dear Lady Mary, and in the name of St. Peter of Rome, and of our Father the Pope, and in the name of all the brethren of the temple, we receive to all the good works of the order which have been performed from the beginnings, and shall be performed to the end. You, your father, your mother, and all of your family, whom you will let have share therein. In like manner do you receive us to all the good work which you have performed and shall perform. We assure you of bread and water, and the poor clothing of the order, and labor and toil enow. Unquote. Then the candidate was admitted. Don't go away, folks. I'll be right back after this very short pause. With a joyous celebration, the candidate was admitted. The white mantle with its red cross was placed by the master over the neck of the candidate and clasped firmly by him. The chaplain recited the 132nd Psalm and the prayer of the Holy Ghost, and each brother repeated a paternoster. Then the master and the chaplain kissed the new entrant on the mouth. As he sat down before the master, the latter delivered him a sermon on his duties. Knights were equipped more lightly than other crusaders, and were issued with shield, sword, lance, and mace. They were allocated 3 horses each, not one with 2 knights riding, but 3 horses each, plus an esquire, who was either a serving brother or a layman, perhaps a youth from a noble family anxious to become a knight in his own turn. Retired knights were looked after by the order, became counselors at meetings, and were eventually buried in coffins in their Templar habit with the legs crossed. Many Templar gravestones show the knight with his feet upon a dog, but most show the crossed thigh bones and the skull, known as the skull and bones. The same skull and bones as the Russell Trust, the Brotherhood of Death at Yale, and the same skull and bones displayed upon the flag of the pirates. It was Philip the Fair of France, bankrupt and fearful of the growing power of the warriors of the temple, who laid the conspiracy for the suppression of the order for all time. It has been hinted that Philip had some forewarning that a plot against the throne was afoot, that the Templars, frustrated in their attempts to win back the Holy Land, were about to turn upon Pope and King alike and try to overcome all Christendom. And believe it or not, that's closer to the truth than anything that you have ever heard about the Templars. In 1305, Pope Clement had been crowned through the assistance of the French king and was actually under the control of the French king, and Philip was ready to bring all the power of church and state against the Knights of the Temple. There had been continued rivalry between the Templars and the Hospitallers on the surface. Underneath, they were one and the same. And Clement, 6 months after his enthronement, wrote asking them to visit him for a conference, ostensibly for the purpose of making plans for aiding the kings of Armenia and Cyprus. The Pope was, however, hoping that he could effect a reconciliation between the two orders, which would in turn strengthen his own position as their only ultimate head. William de Villaret, master of the hospital, was fully engaged in an attack upon the Saracens of Rhodes when the invitation arrived, and could not obey it. But Jacques de Molay, Grand Master of the Temple, decided to accept. He handed over the defense of Limassol in Cyprus to the order's marshal, collected 60 knights, packed 150,000 gold florins plus much other treasure, and set sail for France. At Paris, de Molay was received with honors by the king, who was plotting his downfall. In Poitiers he met Clement and discussed the possibilities of a fresh crusade. De Molay opined that only a complete alliance of all Christendom could be of any avail against the Moslems, and that the amalgamation of the two orders was not a good idea. The Grand Master returned to Paris, and almost at once rumors began to circulate about certain serious charges to be preferred against the order. Troubled at this campaign, the Master, together with Rimbaud de Queyron, preceptor of Outremer, Geoffrey de Gonville, preceptor of Aquitaine, and Hugh de Parado, preceptor of France, returned to Poitiers to justify the order before the Pope. An audience took place about April of 1307, in which the Pope mentioned the charges which had been made. The commission understood that their answers satisfied Clement and returned to the capital in good heart. But this, dear listeners, was only the beginning. The method by which the charges were originally said to have been made was through a former Templar who had been expelled from the order for heresy and other offenses. The Squin de Flexian found himself in prison, together with another man, a Florentine named Nofodie, and they thought or were told that they could obtain their release and a pardon for the crime of which they were currently accused, if only they would testify against the order. One account has it that de Flexian called for the governor of the prisoners, saying that he had a disclosure to make which he could tell the king personally, and which would be more to him than the conquest of an entire kingdom. Another chronicle has it that both men were degraded Templars, and had been actively engaged in the revolt against the king, during which Philip had been forced to take refuge with the Templars. It is further stated that Cardinal Cantilupo, the chamberlain to the Pope, who had been in association with the Templars since he was 11 years old, had confessed some of their doings to his master. 10 main charges were made by de Flexian against the order. 1. Each Templar, on his admission, swore never to quit the order and to further its interest by right or wrong. 2. The heads of the order,
are in secret alliance with the Saracens, and they have more of Mohammedan infidelity than Christian faith. And proof of the latter includes that they make every novice spit upon the cross and trample upon it and blaspheme the faith of Christ in various ways. 3. The heads of the order are heretical, cruel, and sacrilegious men. Whenever any novice, on discovering the iniquity of the order, tries to leave it, they kill him and bury the body secretly by night. They teach women who are pregnant by them how to procure abortion and secretly murder such newborn children. 4. They are infected with the errors of the Fraticelli. They despise the Pope and the authority of the Church. They scorn the sacraments, especially those of penance and confession. They pretend to comply with the rites of the Church simply to avoid detection. 5. The superiors are addicted to the most infamous excesses of debauchery. If anyone expresses his repugnance to this, he is punished by perpetual captivity. 6. The temple houses are the receptacle of every crime and abomination that can be committed. 7. The order works to put the Holy Land into the hands of the Saracens and favors them more than the Christians. 8. The master is installed in secret, and few of the younger brethren are present at this ceremony. It is strongly suspected that on this occasion he repudiates the Christian faith or does something contrary to right. 9. Many statues of the order are unlawful, profane, and contrary to Christianity. In fact, some of them are stone penises. The members are therefore forbidden under pain of perpetual confinement to reveal them to anyone. 10. No vice or crime committed for the honor or benefit of the order is held to be a sin. Now these charges were later augmented by others which were collected through testimony from other enemies of the order, and included such assertions as the use of the phrase Ya Allah, which means O Allah, and the adoration of an idol called the head of Baphomet. In fact, the head of Baphomet was not an idol that they worshipped, but represented the receptacle of the intelligence, or the seat of intelligence, the brain. The light, Lucifer, the gift of intellect, primordial knowing, and that is what really the object of veneration was. Philip and his advisors prepared in great secrecy for the descent upon this powerful organization, the Knights Templar, and on the 12th of September, 1307, sealed letters were sent to all the governors and royal officers throughout France, instructing them to arm themselves on the 12th of the next month and open the sealed orders, and to act upon them forthwith by the morning of Friday, October the 13th. And on that date, almost every Templar in France was in the hands of the king's men, and thus was born the legend that Friday the 13th is an unlucky day. And notice that it was October Friday the 13th, the very first October surprise. Hardly one seems to have had any warning, but they did, because before the king acted, the Templars had moved their wealth, their treasure, their holdings out of the country of France. On the day before his arrest, the Grand Master had actually been chosen by the king to be a pallbearer at a state funeral. The secret orders had it that all Templars were to be seized, tortured, and interrogated. Confessions were to be obtained from them. Pardon might be promised only if they confessed, and all their goods were to be expropriated. But the only thing that they really got were the actual real estate property held by the Templars in France and nowhere else. None of the gold, none of their wealth, none of their jewels, none of their treasures, none of the relics that they had recovered from the Holy Land were ever found. The king himself took possession of the temple at Paris as soon as the Grand Master and his knights were arrested. The next day, the University of Paris assembled, together with canons and other functionaries and ministers, and the chancellor declared that the knights had been proceeded against for heresy. 2 days later, the university met in the temple, and some heads of the order, including the Grand Master, were interrogated. They are said to have confessed to 40 years' guilt. whatever that means. Now, whether de Molay and others confessed on that occasion or not, the king was emboldened to publish an accusation in which he called the knights polluters of the air and devouring wolves. A public meeting was called in the royal gardens and addressed by monks and representatives on this subject. Edward II was the son-in-law of the French Philippe, and to him was sent a priest who invited the English monarch to act at once against the order in Britain. Well, Edward almost at once wrote to say that the charges seemed to him to be incredible. But Pope Clement wrote on November the 22nd to London, assuring Edward that the master of the temple had confessed of his own free will, that knights on their admission to the order denied Christ, others had admitted idolatry and other crimes. He therefore called upon the King of England to arrest all Templars within his domains and to place their lands and goods in custody until their guilt or innocence should be ascertained. He condemned them to torture by the Dominican monks under the Inquisition until they confessed their guilt or were dead. Now notice the date, folks. November the 22nd in the year 1307. That's a significant date in our history and has direct bearing, as you will see, many hours down the line. Or you can see right now, if you attend my lecture in San Diego on March the 15th at 8 p.m. at the, let me see here, where is it at? At the Lafayette Hotel, 2223 El Cajon Boulevard, San Diego, Monday, March 15th, 8 p.m. Or you can call Stan and find out how to order our tape, The Sacrificed King, or my Atlanta lecture, which is over 7 hours long, including all of the Kennedy material. I bet you knew I was talking about Kennedy's assassination, didn't you? Well, this has direct bearing, as you shall see, eventually. Eventually you shall know what it all means. You'll be able to put it all together. Before the King of England received this missive, he seems to have been sorely troubled by the allegations. He wrote on November the 26th to the Seneschal of Agen asking about the charges. On the 4th of December, he wrote to the kings of Portugal, Castile, Aragon, and Sicily asking, quote, what they had heard, and adding that he had given no credit to it, unquote. He wrote to the Pope himself on December the 10th, expressing disbelief of what the French king said, and begging His Holiness to institute an inquiry. Well, folks, by December the 15th, when the papal bull arrived, Edward felt he must act upon it without question. On December the 26th, he wrote to the Pope that his orders would be obeyed, but in the interim, Edward had sent word to Wales, Scotland, and Ireland that the Templars were all to be seized, as in England, but they were to be treated with kindness. On October the 19th, less than a week after they had been arrested in France, 140 prisoners were being tortured by the Dominican imbert in the Paris temple. Promises and the rack produced many confessions. 36 of the examinees died during these proceedings. Throughout France, the racks worked overtime and the confessions poured forth. Many good men were crippled for the rest of their life. Many of these were contradictory and confused, and perhaps there is little wonder of that. How many of you could resist even for 5 minutes the tortures of the medieval Inquisition? The Pope now seemed a little uneasy at the arbitrary methods which were being employed. Philip wrote sharply to him saying that he, the king, was doing God's work and rendered accounts to God alone. He offered to turn over all the goods of the Templars to the service of the Holy Land. Clement, still a weakling, merely stipulated that the inquisitions of each bishop should be confirmed by a provincial council, and that the examination of the heads of the order should be reserved to himself. Now we hear a constant succession of confessions and retractions, allegations that the heads of the order confessed completely and spontaneously to the Pope himself. The Pope himself, for some unexplained reason, folks, tried to escape to Bordeaux, but was stopped by the king. Now he was the monarch's captive as well as his creation. Detailed confessions of individual Templars have been kept on record, many of them undoubtedly obtained by extreme racking and other tortures. The Templars who were prepared to defend the order in court were brought to Paris, to the number of 546, deprived of their knightly habits and the sacraments of the Church. They had no means to acquire defense counsel. Their numbers rose to 900, and now they clamored for the presence of the Grand Master, who was held elsewhere. An act of accusation in the name of the Pope was drawn up, and 75 Templars drew up the defense. The accusation had it now that, quote, at the time of their reception they were made to deny God, Christ, the Virgin, etc., and in particular to declare that Christ was not the true God, but a false prophet who had been crucified for his own crimes and not for the redemption of the world. They spat and trampled upon the cross, especially on Good Friday. They worshipped a cat, which sometimes appeared in their chapters. Their priests, when celebrating Mass, did not pronounce the words of consecration. They believed that their master could absolve them from their sins. They were told at their reception that they might abandon themselves to all kinds of licentiousness. They had idols in all their provinces, some with 3 faces, some with 1. They worshipped these idols in their chapters, believed that they could save them, regarded them as the givers of wealth to the order and of fertility to the earth. They touched them with cords which they afterward tied around their own bodies underneath their robes, and that is still practiced today by Freemasons and by the Mormon Church. Those who at the time of their reception would not comply with these practices were put to death or imprisoned. The reply of the Templars denied every charge and stated that they had been subjected to every kind of illegality since their arrest. 54 of the knights who had volunteered to defend the order were committed to the flames, having been declared relapsed heretics before the trials had even started. And you'll see this number 54 crop up later, and even in the modern day. And sometimes it's 54 plus 1, the Grand Master, who later was burned at the stake. 4 years to the day after the first arrests, the Pope led a convocation of 114 bishops to come to a final decision about the Templar order. Well, folks, the prelates of Spain, England, Germany, Denmark, Ireland, and Scotland called for the Templars to be allowed to defend themselves. The Pope retorted by closing the session almost at once. He would not hear of it. Out of 1,500 to 2,000 Templars who were in hiding in the vicinity, 9 knights actually came forward to testify for the order. The Pope doubled his guard and sent a message to the king to do the same. As there was still danger from the hidden knights, they were not heard. Only 1 Italian prelate and 3 French ones voted to prevent the order from putting in its defense. Now Philippe, deciding that something should be done to hasten affairs, set off for Venice in the conference. His arrival had an electric effect. On his sole authority, the Pope almost immediately abolished the order in a secret consistory. And this was on March the 22nd in the year 1313. And 1313 plays a significant number later on, as that was a famous address in New Orleans, as some of you may remember. On May the 2nd, when the bull was published, the order ceased officially to exist. The Grand Master, assumed but not proved to be guilty, was sentenced to perpetual imprisonment. Most of the other knights were released, and many of these passed their remaining days in poverty. De Molay and one of his chiefs, Guy of Auvergne, proclaimed their innocence on the public stage to which they had been taken to have sentence announced. The king, upon hearing them recant their confession, immediately had them committed to the flames. And some say that while he was being burned at the stake, that de Molay cursed both the Pope and the King of France, stating that within a certain short period of time he would meet them in another life in front of God, who would judge them for their crimes. And believe it or not, folks, Well within the period of time, which was not very long, both the Pope and the King of France were dead, and I'm sure joined Jacques de Molay in front of God for their final judgment. We are in no way finished with the story of the Knights Templar, but until tomorrow night, good night,